Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation and also for the introduction. I understood something like neuroscience and my name, and I think this kind of sums up what I'm going to do here. During the break, somebody asked me how it is that I came to be interested in the topic of neuroscience, and especially about the topic that I'm going to talk about today, which is how the brain can unlock its potential, or how the brain can reach a healthy peak performance. This goes back quite some time. This goes back about 20 years ago, when I was 16. That's the day or the moment that I decided to leave my parents' home. I was still very young, and I know I was also still very naive, but I was ready with school, and I was ready to conquer the world. At least I thought I was. And my mother, who is a person who doesn't really say much and who kind of just let us do, there's 4 children of us, and she decided to just let us be and let us develop ourselves. But the day that I left with 16, she decided to come to me and to give one final piece of good advice for life. And she came to me and she said, I know that you have a lot of potential. I know you can do a lot. However, if you want to make it in life, make sure you use your potential. You use it to such an extent so that you can develop the best version of yourself. I was 16 and you've been 16. That advice at that moment did not mean anything to me. I was just happy to leave home. But it is about 10 years after that, when I was working as a scientist in the field of neurosciences, that the advice came back to my mind. Namely, unlocking the potential in your brain. How do you do that? Finally, I had all the resources available as a neuroscientist to have a look at that particular question. What does it mean that you develop the best version of yourself? And this, for me, this has been a long journey, a journey on which I came to understand a lot about how the brain brings a performance, but it also did change my life quite a lot. And this journey, I have summarized this for you in a short talk, and I would just welcome you to go on the journey with me. To understand how the brain can use its full potential, it is first of all important to very briefly understand how the brain processes information. Now, it might not come to a surprise to you, but the brain is never at rest. All the time, your brain is producing what we call spontaneous activation. You've noticed there's constantly this chatting in your mind. It's the spontaneous activation that is constantly in your mind. Now, this spontaneous activation has a very important function. It filters all the incoming information. So all the time you're hearing things, you're seeing things, you're feeling things, and somehow this needs to be filtered. And for this to be filtered, we use our spontaneous activation. Now, that was already a lot of theory, but I have included a short experiment so you can experience what it is. And for this short experiment, I'm going to divide the full group just very shortly into 2 groups. And I would say that in between Alfred and Yuka, I apologize for that, it would be the line. And I would say everybody behind Alfred, so this side, the side of the outside, that's group number 1. And all the people behind Yuko, that's group number 2. When I start the experiment, I'm going to ask group 2 to close their eyes, and I'm going to show group 1 a picture. Then I'm going to ask also group 1 to close their eyes, and I'm going to show group 2 a picture. And then at the end of the experiment, I'm going to change the slide. And in the middle of the slide, you will see a word, it's in English, that consists of 4 letters. But the first letter is missing. And when I say that you can all open your eyes again, just as quickly and as loudly as possible, just complete the word that's in the middle of the screen. Okay? I'll just wait for the translation to be finished so we can start. Okay. So all the people behind Yuko, so the side of the wall, I would ask you all now to close your eyes for a moment. Now all people from number 1, the group, also close your eyes, please. Now group number 2, please open your eyes. Now all close your eyes, please. And now everybody open their eyes and complete the word you see. It was quite loud, very well done. What did I do? You still say it's book? Yes, but I'll show you why she says it's book, because what did I do? The first group received this picture of books, right? The second group received this picture of a pen. And what happens is that people of the first group usually say book and people of the second group usually say cook. What did I do? With one image, I very shortly manipulated the spontaneous activation that you have in your brain. And with this new spontaneous activation, you filtered the word on the screen and you gave it a meaning, right? That's what happened. That's why she said book and somebody else said cook. Now, this spontaneous activation that you have in your brain, this constantly changes. You might have noticed that the world looks very different when you are in love compared to when you are sad or angry. So depending on the emotion that you have created in your system, you will see the world in a different way because the spontaneous activation in your brain has changed. Now, interestingly, the spontaneous activation in your brain is also relatively stable. This means that if I were able, at this very moment, to measure the spontaneous activation in your brain for 5 to 7 minutes, then with a very large precision, I would be able to predict a part of your personality and the type of decisions you make. If you really look closely into these studies, it's not that surprising, but we can tell a lot just by looking at the spontaneous activation that you have in your brain. Now, before I'm going to say something about performance in the brain, one last thing I want to share with you. The spontaneous activation that you have in your brain is very well organized. It's organized in the so-called functional networks. These are networks that we all have in our brain. It's like a chain of brain structures, and we have quite a few of them. But one brain network is extremely dominantly active, and we've already talked about it today. Jason talked about it. It's called the default mode network. It's like a computer. A computer has default settings. You also have that, and with those it's called the default mode network. It's also, non-scientifically said, it's also the monkey in your mind. It's the thoughts that Jason was talking about. We have so many thoughts. They're produced by our default mode network. And when we're not aware of them, we're just on autopilot because the spontaneous or the default mode network really likes to be active. It's like the monkey that really likes to chat. So now you can forget everything I said. I'm just going to ask you to remember one thing, and that's the default mode network. Everything else you can forget, okay? So I was going to talk about performance, and if I talk about performance, I use a very easy definition. Namely, the performance that we bring stands for the potential that you have minus your internal interferences. What is your potential? It's your talents, your skills, your know-how, and you all have that. But we also all have to deal at times with internal interferences, and they block us in our potential. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you are very good at singing, and when you are at home and you're alone in the shower or in the car, and you're singing along with a song, you bring your best performance, right? It's like you on stage doing what are those shows, the Talents of Britain, or how are they called? We all can do that when we're alone in the shower. But then I would ask you to come on stage here at this very moment and to sing a song for us. Well, what is going to happen very likely, you will not use your full potential to sing. It's very likely that you will not bring your best performance. And strangely, because in fact you do have the potential to sing much better. And why is that? It is because all of a sudden, this situation, we started to create these internal interferences, such as nervousness, anxiety, and these interferences, all of a sudden, they blocked us in our potential. What do we need then to unlock the potential in our brain or to increase our performance in a healthy way? We need something to reduce those internal interferences. And we do this with a capacity that is called self-regulation. Self-regulation, this is your capacity to down-regulate your internal interferences so you can access your potential and become the best version of yourself. It's a very important capacity. It is much more important than intelligence. You have many intelligent people who have absolutely no idea how to use their potential. But I don't think I have to tell you, I think you guys know that. Self-regulation is a very important capacity. Now, self-regulation, this is something that we can all improve, and to understand how we can improve that, let's have a look at how the brain functions. About 90% of our internal interferences are being caused by too much activation in one particular brain region. And that brain region is called the amygdala. The amygdala are very deep inside your brain and we need them. However, if they are too active, they cause anxiety, insecurity, negative emotions. And what happens in the brain? They absolutely block us in our potential. Now, for our own potential, we need a totally different brain structure. We need a brain structure that is fully in the front of our brain, and that is called the PFC, or the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal because it's fully in the front of our brain, as you can see from the picture. And this part of your brain is responsible for all your executive functions. Analyzing information, thinking, making good decisions. In fact, all those cognitive functions that are important for a good cognitive performance, they all run over your prefrontal cortex. And the bad message is, and I'm sure you've noticed it already, but the prefrontal cortex has a limited capacity. It's a bit like a battery. If the battery is fully charged, you are mentally super fit. This is the moment where you make excellent decisions, you can analyze information very well. But the more we use this mental battery, the more it gets empty. And guess what happens when the mental battery is empty? You are the worst version of yourself. And this is not what we want to have. And to give you an idea of how the prefrontal cortex and how the amygdala, on how they operate throughout the normal day, I'm going to tell you a story. It's a story about all of us. It's a story about the last day where we were working, where we just went to the office. And I'm going to show you that throughout the normal day, what happened in the amygdala area and what happened in the prefrontal cortex area. Now keep in the back of your mind that we want to have the amygdala not too active and we want to have the prefrontal cortex fully charged. Okay, that's the ideal situation to be the best version of yourself. So the story starts with the morning time. When we wake up and we haven't slept enough, our prefrontal cortex is not fully charged. You don't see it so well with the colors, but these cups here, they show that the prefrontal cortex is not fully charged. When you look outside, that day, the last day you were working, it was raining outside, and when it rains outside, we are generally a bit in a bad mood. And when we're in a bad mood, what happens? The amygdala become active, and we use the prefrontal cortex to downregulate the amygdala activation. You have 2 children, 2 daughters, and even though it's raining outside, they absolutely want to put on a summer dress. You might know that issue as a parent, but what do? In the morning time, you're still quite a good version of yourself. So what do? You negotiate with your child. And for this, you need a lot of prefrontal cortex capacity. What happens then is, and you don't see it so well on the screen, but what happens then is you come to your job, and during the day, during your job, I can summarize it as follows, but you use your prefrontal cortex like crazy. Nearly every task that you do during a normal day runs over your prefrontal cortex. So after a super busy day like that, what happens? You're finally home, and this is the state of mind. We have our amygdala that is like spiking, and we have the prefrontal cortex, the mental battery, that is empty. And let me tell you a secret. This is not just happening to you. This also happens to your children, to your husband, and to your wife, and then we all come together in the house in a mental state like that. And what happens then? You know that probably from experience, but at least what happens in my household is my kids, they start fighting. You try to negotiate with your children again, you're absolutely at the end of your energy. And when you think that things can't get worse, that's the moment that you step bare feet onto a Lego brick. Have you already stepped onto a Lego brick? Yes, you have, I see. It hurts, right? And after a day like that, it hurts even more. Because that's our mental state. We have too much amygdala activation and we have too little prefrontal cortex capacity. And let me tell you something. Many people have designed a life where this state is a very frequent state. And then you come home and you are expected to have the best time of your life. Well, I tell you, that's not going to happen. And I say we can do much better than that. Because many people, unfortunately, are basically in a permanent state like that. I will give you one example to show you to what very bad consequences this can lead. And this is a story about something that happened in the States in 2014. There was a young guy, he was 16 or 17 years old, and he went into a grocery shop and he took a few donuts, a few drinks, and he leaves the shop without paying. What happens outside, a video was taken of that, and I have seen it several times. And inside, the shop owner, he calls the police and tells the police that some guy stole a few stuff from his shop and that the police should come by. Now, outside from the shop, this guy indeed, he had his donuts, he had his drinks, and he was just walking from one side to the other side. To my opinion, he did not look aggressive. What happened a few moments later? A police car pulls up. 2 policemen jump out of the car, take their gun, they point their gun to the guy, and they call out, "Put your hands where we can see them." Now, this is usually what the person would do, show the hands and just go with the policeman to the office. But this young guy did something very unexpected. Even though the distance between the policeman and the guy was very large, the young guy, he took a few steps forwards, raised his hands and called out, "Shoot me." And you can guess what happened. Within a few seconds, one policeman starts shooting and the other policeman shoots as well. And that boy died. That boy had no gun, had no knife. So it was the wrong decision. And we know now that it's the wrong decision. And those policemen are trained not to shoot in a situation like that. But let me tell you, where is that knowledge from those policemen, what they've learned? That knowledge is in my prefrontal cortex. And when we are in a situation like that where we're extremely stressed, this is our state of mind. Our amygdala is overactive and our prefrontal cortex is not even being part of the game. So during my journey, I started to look for a solution. I started to look for a strategy with which we can downregulate the amygdala activation, the source of our interferences, and a strategy with which we can boost our prefrontal cortex. Because in the end, this is something that we can use to become the best version of yourself. I also found that strategy. It is a strategy that when you regularly apply that, you see mainly two effects. First of all, when you practice regularly, you will see that the amygdala becomes smaller and less active. So the largest source of your internal interferences, it becomes smaller. This is when the world will start to look differently to you. The second effect, and this is a side effect of the first effect, is that your cognitive functions, your prefrontal cortex, will receive a significant boost. So you will improve significantly in using your potential. Now, what's the strategy I'm talking about here? This is what the conference is about. I'm talking here about mindfulness. And as a skeptical scientist, I worked a lot in science, a very long time, more than 10 years. And as a scientist, the first time that I read the word mindfulness, especially I read mindfulness meditation, I put it aside. I said, I am not going to do any meditation, and I am not going to tell my scientist colleagues that I was reading about meditation. Even though the article was extremely highly published, which in science is a very important thing. But at the same time, I can tell you that I realized that I had discovered something important. And so I started to read back into mindfulness meditation, and especially about those positive effects on the brain, on our behavior. And that's the moment I decided to include that in our studies. I introduced it to my colleagues, and we started to frequently include that in the studies because we saw the scientific value. This was the first hurdle to take. The second one is, now try it out. It's a typical scientist thing. We think we know a lot, but we don't even try. With mindfulness, this was something different. With mindfulness, I decided to practice it, and this is also the last part of my presentation. I'd like to show you on how mindfulness is practiced correctly. And for me to understand that, it was very helpful to understand how this works in the brain, because this helped me at least to improve my own personal mindfulness practice. And to understand that, I will make the link to the first thing that I talked about and what I asked you to remember, namely the default mode network. These are your thoughts. Our brain produces about 70,000 thoughts per day. And this is all caused by our default mode network, or I also call it's the monkey in your mind. It's constantly chatting. It's constantly telling you what to do, what to feel, what to think, giving you its opinion. That's the default mode network. And you don't have to do any effort to activate that. It's just there. For mindfulness, we use a totally different brain network. We use a brain network that is shown here in blue, that is called the direct experience network. It is a network that is in very close connection to our senses, such as feeling, hearing, tasting. And now nature has designed our brain in a very beautiful way. And why is that? Well, these two brain networks, they cannot be activated simultaneously. This means that if you activate the direct experience network, you will deactivate the default mode network. That's when Jason said, you feel your fingertips. Don't think. Because when you feel your fingertips, That's the moment that you activate the direct experience network, and pure biologically, the default mode network will be shut out. But you might have noticed that when you were feeling your fingertips, it was only a matter of a few milliseconds or seconds that the monkey starts chatting again. You are distracted, or you are thinking about something, or you have images in your mind. That's fine. That's just the way our brain works. But that's for us a cue to bring our attention back to our senses. I also brought a small exercise to finish up the presentation, and I'd like to do a short exercise with all of you. In fact, you've already done quite a lot of exercise this morning and also yesterday. Nevertheless, I'd like to do a small exercise with you and just keep it in the back of your mind. Well, you don't have to keep it in your mind, but at least now you understand that when you bring your attention to your senses, you will activate the direct experience network and you will deactivate the default mode network. For this small exercise, I'm going to ask you to put your hands just flat on your knees, both hands. And when I say start, I'm going to ask you then to close your eyes and to bring your full attention for 100% just to the sensation that you have on your hands, just feeling whatever is there. You can close your eyes now and you can bring your full attention to the sensation on your skin. Okay, you can open your eyes again. This was a very, very short exercise. Ideally, we do this much longer. But I just wanted to do this very short exercise with you. So perhaps you see the meditation that you do, the mindfulness meditation, perhaps in a different light. Because what it is that you do biologically, you switch between those two networks. And by doing that, your amygdala will become smaller and less activated. And it's the amygdala and the default mode network that is causing all the chaos in our mind. But by switching those networks, we bring peace in our mind. And we reduce the amygdala activation, the source of our interferences. So making the bridge now to the advice that my mother gave to me, she never expected I would take it so seriously, especially not because when I left with 16 years old, I was having green hair, I was having 7 piercings in one ear, and she never expected me to really think about the advice she gave me and to really even do research about it. But for me, what it meant is really that I had much more access to my potential. And at least I feel I'm much more in connection with myself. And also I can, or at least I aim to, develop the best version of myself. And mindfulness for me is absolutely the greatest tool for that. In order to do that, of course, I had to fully understand everything, because as I told you, I'm trained as a scientist and I always need to understand stuff. But I've come to understand that mindfulness really is the key to become the best version of yourself. This is what you can do for yourself, but let's think bigger. You can do this in your partnership, in your family. You can do this as a team, or even think bigger, you can do this as a company, or even think bigger. You can also do this as a humankind, because mindfulness is a way to create a better version of humankind. I'm fully convinced of that. And with this nice message, I'm very happy that I could share this story with you today. So thank you very much.